The summer heat pressed down on Fort Bragg like a heavy blanket, making even the early morning air thick and uncomfortable. Sarah Martinez wiped sweat from her forehead as she hurried across the base, her medical intern badge bouncing against her chest with each quick step. At 24, she was one of the youngest interns ever accepted into the military medical program, and she felt the weight of that responsibility every single day. The base hospital was already buzzing with activity when she arrived at 6 in the morning. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, doctors reviewed charts, and the familiar sounds of medical equipment created a steady background hum. Sarah had been working here for 3 months now, and she was finally starting to feel like she belonged in this world where military precision met medical care. Dr. Richardson, the chief resident, barely looked up from his clipboard when Sarah approached the nurse's station. "Martinez, we've got a situation in room 237. Ranger came in last night, multiple injuries from a training accident. He's stable for now, but we need someone to monitor him closely. The regular nursing staff is stretched thin today." Sarah nodded quickly, grabbing the patient file from his hands. "What happened to him?" "Rappelling exercise went wrong. Rope snapped about 30 feet up. He's got internal injuries, possible head trauma, and we're still running tests. His name is Sergeant First Class David Chin. 28 years old, been with the Rangers for 6 years. Dr. Richardson finally looked at her directly. "This one's important, Martinez. Chin isn't just any soldier. Keep that in mind." The cryptic comment puzzled Sarah, but she didn't have time to ask questions. Dr. Richardson was already moving on to the next patient, leaving her to figure out what made Sergeant Chin so special. She walked down the long hospital corridor, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, and pushed open the door to room 237. The sight that greeted her made her pause. Sergeant Chin lay unconscious in the hospital bed, connected to various monitors that beeped steadily. His face was bruised and swollen, with a large bandage covering part of his head. Even injured and unconscious, there was something about him that commanded respect. His military bearing was evident even in sleep, his shoulders straight despite being flat on his back. Sarah pulled up a chair next to his bed and began reviewing his chart. The injuries were extensive but not immediately life-threatening. Fractured ribs, internal bleeding that had been stopped through surgery, a concussion, and various cuts and bruises. What struck her most was how young he looked despite everything he had clearly been through. The file mentioned multiple deployments, commendations for bravery, and specialized training that was mostly classified. As she settled in to monitor his condition, Sarah noticed something unusual about the way the medical staff treated this particular room. Nurses would peek in more frequently than normal, and she caught glimpses of serious conversations happening just outside the door. Phone calls were made in hushed tones, and there seemed to be an undercurrent of tension that she couldn't quite understand. Around noon, Sergeant Chin began to stir. His eyes fluttered open slowly, unfocused at first, then, gradually becoming more alert. Sarah immediately moved closer to his bed, checking his pupils with a small flashlight, and noting his responses. "Sergeant Chin? Can you hear me? I'm Sarah Martinez, a medical intern. You're at Fort Bragg Hospital. You had an accident during training." Chin tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper. Sarah quickly got him some ice chips and helped him wet his lips. After a few minutes, his voice became clearer. "How long have I been here?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room as if assessing potential threats even in his weakened state. "Since last night. It's Tuesday afternoon now. You've been unconscious for about 18 hours. Sarah checked his chart again. "How are you feeling? Any pain?" Chin attempted to sit up, then winced and fell back against the pillows. "Everything hurts, but I've had worse." "The mission, did everyone else make it out okay?" "The other soldiers in your unit are fine. This was just a training accident, not a combat situation. You need to focus on getting better right now." But Chin wasn't listening to her reassurances. His eyes had taken on a distant look, and Sarah could see him struggling with something beyond physical pain. She had seen this before in other soldiers, the weight of experiences that civilians couldn't fully understand. You don't know who I am, do you? Chen asked quietly, studying Sarah's face. You're Sergeant First Class David Chin, Army Ranger, and right now you're my patient. That's all I need to know. Something shifted in Chen's expression, surprise, maybe even relief. Most people here, they treat me differently once they know. Sarah was curious about what he meant, but before she could ask, a nurse appeared in the doorway with an urgent expression. Ms. Martinez, we need you at the nurse's station immediately. Sarah excused herself and stepped outside the room. The nurse, whose name tag read Lieutenant Morrison, looked troubled. We've been getting calls about Sergeant Chen all morning. High-ranking officials want updates on his condition. There's also been some unusual activity around the base. Security has been increased, and there are people asking questions about who has access to his room. What kind of people? Sarah asked, feeling a growing sense that she was in the middle of something much bigger than a routine training accident. The kind who don't usually concern themselves with injured rangers, no matter how elite they are. Dr. Richardson wants to brief you privately in his office in an hour. Until then, don't leave Chen alone, and don't discuss his condition with anyone except the immediate medical team. Sarah returned to room 237 with her mind racing. Chen was awake and seemed to be watching the door when she entered. Everything all right? He asked, his trained instincts clearly picking up on her tension. Just routine hospital stuff, Sarah said, but she could tell he didn't believe her. She spent the next hour taking his vital signs, adjusting his medications, and trying to make small talk. But Chen seemed lost in thought, occasionally staring out the window as if expecting something. The conversation gradually became more personal as the afternoon wore on. Chen told her about growing up in San Francisco, about joining the army to pay for college, and about discovering that he was good at the kind of work that most people couldn't handle. Sarah found herself sharing stories about medical school, about her family in Texas, and about her decision to specialize in military medicine. You're different from most doctors, Chen observed. You actually listen. Maybe that's because I'm still learning, Sarah replied. I don't have all the answers yet, so I have to pay attention to everything. Chen smiled for the first time since waking up. That's a good trait to have in this business. Too many people think they know everything about a situation before they've really looked at it. As the day progressed, Sarah began to notice more unusual activity around the hospital. Men in suits appeared in the corridors, speaking quietly into phones. Security guards were posted at positions she had never seen them before. The normal casual atmosphere of the base hospital had been replaced by something much more tense and formal. Dr. Richardson finally called her to his office just before 5 o'clock. His usually relaxed demeanor was gone, replaced by the serious expression of someone dealing with a situation beyond routine medical care. Sit down, Martinez. We need to talk about your patient. Dr. Richardson closed the office door and pulled the blinds shut. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, understood? Sarah nodded, feeling her heart rate increase. Sergeant Chin isn't just any ranger. He's part of a very specialized unit that handles extremely sensitive operations. The kind of operations that most people will never know about, and that's by design. 3 weeks ago, his team completed a mission that, let's just say, it prevented something very bad from happening to American interests overseas. Dr. Richardson paused, seemingly choosing his words carefully. The problem is that mission may have made some very dangerous people very angry. People who have resources and reach that most civilians can't imagine. The training accident yesterday may not have been an accident at all. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think someone tried to kill him? We're investigating that possibility. In the meantime, Chen's safety is a matter of national security. That's why there have been so many phone calls, so many people showing interest in his condition. The wrong information getting to the wrong people could put him in even greater danger. But surely here on the base he's safe. Dr. Richardson shook his head grimly. Fort Bragg is secure, but it's not impenetrable. And sometimes the greatest threats come from places you least expect them. That's why I'm asking you to stay with Chen tonight. The regular nursing staff doesn't have the security clearance to know what we're dealing with. You do now. Sarah stared at him. I have security clearance? As of 2 hours ago, yes. Your background check came back clean, and frankly, Chin seems to trust you. In situations like this, sometimes instinct matters more than protocol. The weight of the responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had come to work that morning thinking it would be another routine day of learning and helping patients recover. Now she was being told that she was responsible for protecting someone whose life might be in danger from enemies she couldn't even identify. When she returned to room 237, Chin was sitting up in bed, looking more alert than he had all day. He studied her face as she entered. Let me guess, he said quietly. They told you who I really am, and now everything makes sense. Sarah pulled her chair closer to his bed. They told me that you might be in danger, and that I need to stay here tonight to make sure you're safe. Chin was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry you got pulled into this. It's not fair to you. I became a doctor to help people. If staying here tonight helps keep you safe, then it's exactly where I should be. You don't understand what you're signing up for. The people who might be looking for me, they don't hesitate to hurt innocent bystanders. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then, it's a good thing I'm not planning to be a bystander. As evening approached, the hospital grew quieter, but the sense of tension remained. Sarah noticed that the security guards outside Chen's room had been replaced by soldiers she didn't recognize, men who carried themselves with the same deadly competence she was beginning to associate with Chen himself. Around 8 o'clock, Chen's condition took a slight turn for the worse. His temperature spiked, and some of his internal injuries showed signs of renewed bleeding. Sarah worked quickly to stabilize him, calling for additional medical support and adjusting his medications. You're good at this, Chen observed, even as she was inserting a new 4-line. I've had good teachers, Sarah replied, focused intently on her work. No, it's more than that. You don't panic. Most people, when things start going wrong, they freeze up or make mistakes. You get calmer. Sarah paused in her work to look at him. Maybe that's because I've learned that panicking doesn't help anyone. The situation is what it is. You deal with it or you don't. Chen smiled despite his pain. You sound like someone I know. My team leader has that same philosophy. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself learning more about Chen's world. Not the classified details, he was too professional to share those, but the human side of being a soldier who operated in the shadows. The weight of carrying secrets, the difficulty of maintaining relationships when you couldn't talk about your work, the constant awareness that each mission might be your last. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked during one of their quiet conversations. Joining the Rangers? No. The work we do, it matters. People get to sleep safely in their beds because of missions they'll never know about. That's worth something. But the cost. Chen was quiet for a moment. There's always a cost. The question is whether what you're protecting is worth what you're giving up to protect it. Around midnight, Sarah noticed changes in the activity outside Chen's room. The guards became more alert, radios crackled with increased chatter, and she could see additional personnel taking positions throughout the hospital wing. Chen noticed it too. Something's happening, he said, his voice taking on the tone of a soldier preparing for action despite his injuries. Sarah checked the monitors and saw that Chen's heart rate was increasing, his body responding to the stress even in his weakened condition. You need to try to stay calm. Whatever's happening out there, there are people handling it. That's not how my world works, Chen replied. In my world, threats don't wait for you to be ready for them. The tension in the hospital continued to build as the night progressed. Sarah found herself checking the locks on the door, positioning herself where she could see both Chen and the entrance to the room, and trying to project a calm she didn't entirely feel. At 2 a.m, everything changed. Sarah heard the sound of helicopters approaching the base, their rotors cutting through the night air with a rhythmic intensity that seemed to make the entire building vibrate. Chen's eyes opened immediately, his military training bringing him to full alertness despite his injuries. Those aren't standard base helicopters, he said quietly. Sarah moved to the window and carefully peered through the blinds. In the distance, she could see lights moving across the base, more activity than she had ever witnessed during her time at Fort Bragg. "Chen," she said, turning back to him, "I think we're about to find out exactly how important you really are." The helicopters were getting closer, and Sarah could see that Chen was struggling between his desire to know what was happening and his need to trust that others were handling the situation. For a soldier accustomed to being in control, being better than and dependent on others was perhaps the greatest challenge he faced. As dawn approached, the activity outside intensified rather than diminished. Sarah had managed to keep Chen stable throughout the night, but both of them were exhausted and on edge. The waiting, the uncertainty, and the constant underlying tension had taken their toll. Then, just as the first light of morning began to filter through the hospital windows, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not the usual soft-soled shoes of medical personnel, but the sharp, precise sounds of military boots moving with purpose. Chen heard them too and turned toward the door with an expression of recognition mixed with surprise. "I think," he said quietly, "you're about to meet some very important people." Sarah straightened her scrubs and tried to compose herself, having no idea that her long night of watching over an injured ranger was about to become something that would change her understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the hidden wars fought to protect freedom. The footsteps stopped outside room 237, and Sarah heard voices conferring in low, urgent tones. Whatever was about to happen, she knew that her simple act of staying by Chen's side through the night had placed her at the center of something much larger than herself. As the door handle turned, Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever came next, knowing only that she had done her job and kept her patient safe through the longest night of her medical career. The door opened with deliberate precision, and Sarah immediately understood that everything about the previous night had been leading to this moment. The first person to enter was a woman in an army uniform with stars on her collar, that Sarah recognized from her military protocol training. Behind her came three men in similar dress uniforms, their bearing unmistakably that of senior military leadership. Chen attempted to sit up straighter in his bed, the instinctive response of a soldier recognizing superior officers. Sarah moved protectively closer to her patient, her medical training overriding any intimidation she might feel from the high-ranking visitors. "Sergeant Chen, I'm General Patricia Hayes, Joint Chiefs of Staff," the woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command but tempered with genuine concern. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday, ma'am," Chen replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "Thank you for coming." General Hayes turned her attention to Sarah, studying her with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You must be Intern Martinez. Dr. Richardson has briefed us on your dedicated care of Sergeant Chen throughout the night." Sarah felt suddenly self-conscious, aware that her scrubs were wrinkled and her hair disheveled after the long night. "I was just doing my job, General." "Ms. Martinez, what you did last night was far more than just your job," said one of the men, stepping forward. His name tag identified him as General Morrison, and his expression was grave. "Your presence here may have saved Sergeant Chen's life." Sarah looked confused. "I don't understand." "I provided medical care and monitoring. That's what any medical professional would do." General Hayes exchanged a look with her colleagues before pulling up a chair next to Chen's bed. "Ms. Martinez, what we're about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Your security clearance was expedited because circumstances demanded it, but now you need to understand exactly what those circumstances are." Chen tried to interrupt. "General, with respect, Ms. Martinez doesn't need to be involved in operational details." "I'm afraid she already is involved, Sergeant," General Morrison replied. "The moment she chose to stay with you last night, she became part of this situation." General Hayes leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. 3 weeks ago, Sergeant Chen's team prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed thousands of American civilians. The mission was successful, but it exposed a network of enemy operatives who have been planning retaliation. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The training accident was an assassination attempt, General Hayes confirmed. The rope didn't snap by accident. It was cut with a precision tool designed to fail under stress. If Chin had fallen from a greater height, or if the angle had been different, he would have died on impact. Sarah looked at Chin, seeing him in an entirely new light. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the less you knew, the safer you would be," Chin replied. "At least, that's what I thought." General Morrison stepped forward. "During the night, our intelligence services intercepted communications indicating that another attempt would be made on Sergeant Chen's life. The assassins had identified the hospital as his location and were planning to strike before dawn." Sarah's hands began to shake as the implications sank in. "You mean while I was here, while we were just talking?" "A team of highly trained killers was making their way toward this room," General Hayes said quietly. "They were stopped, but not before they had reached the hospital building itself." Chen's face went pale despite his injuries. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I had no idea they would find me so quickly." General Morrison pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah surveillance footage. The images were grainy and taken in low light, but she could see figures moving with military precision through the hospital corridors. They were dressed as maintenance workers, but their movements betrayed their true nature. "They made it to the 3rd floor before our security team intercepted them," General Morrison explained. "This floor." They were approximately 50 meters from this room when they were stopped. Sarah sank into her chair, the weight of how close they had come to danger overwhelming her. "What happened to them?" "That's not something you need to know," General Hayes said firmly but not unkindly. "What you need to know is that your decision to stay here last night provided us with crucial intelligence about their plans and allowed us to protect both you and Sergeant Chin." Sarah looked confused. "How did my being here help you gather intelligence?" One of the generals she hadn't been introduced to spoke for the first time. His name tag read, General Park. And his tone was technical, analytical. The assassins had detailed information about hospital staffing patterns. They knew which rooms would be empty, which hallways would be unmonitored, and when shift changes occurred. What they didn't expect was for someone to be in this room all night. Their plan relied on Chin being alone and vulnerable. General Hayes continued. When their reconnaissance showed that someone was staying with him, it forced them to change their approach. Those changes created opportunities for our security team to identify and intercept them. Chin was staring at Sarah with an expression of amazement mixed with gratitude. "You saved my life without even knowing you were doing it." Sarah shook her head. "I was just following medical protocol. Dr. Richardson asked me to monitor you overnight because of your condition." General Morrison smiled grimly. "Dr. Richardson was following orders from us. We needed someone in this room who wouldn't be recognized as security personnel, someone whose presence would seem natural and medical rather than protective." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You used me as bait." General Hayes held up a hand. "Not bait. Protection. And insurance. We had security measures in place, but sometimes the best protection comes from the most unexpected sources." "But you didn't ask me," Sarah said, anger beginning to mix with her shock. "You didn't give me a choice about whether I wanted to be involved in whatever this is." General Park stepped forward. "Ms. Martinez, if we had told you the truth last night, would you still have stayed?" Sarah considered the question honestly. "I don't know. And that uncertainty," General Hayes said gently, "could have cost Sergeant Chin his life. Your genuine care for your patient, your natural medical instincts, created the perfect cover for keeping him safe." Chin tried to reach for Sarah's hand but couldn't quite manage it with his injuries. "Sarah, I know this isn't fair to you. You didn't sign up for this kind of danger." Sarah looked at him, then at the assembled generals. "Actually, maybe I did. I chose to specialize in military medicine. I chose to work on a base where soldiers are prepared for combat. Maybe I just never thought about what that really meant." General Hayes studied Sarah carefully. "What it means, Ms. Martinez, is that sometimes protecting the people who protect our country requires sacrifices from civilians who never expected to make them. Sergeant Chun and his team risked their lives in situations most people will never know about," General Morrison added. "They do it so that families can sleep safely, so that children can go to school without fear, so that ordinary life can continue. Sometimes that protection requires others to step up in ways they never anticipated. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she had learned. The room remained silent except for the steady beeping of Chen's monitors and the distant sounds of the base waking up to a new day. "What happens now?" Sarah finally asked. General Hayes exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Now we need to decide how to keep Sergeant Chen safe while he recovers, and how to ensure that you're protected as well." "Protected? Why would I need protection?" General Park consulted his tablet. The intercepted communications included references to anyone who might have information about Chen's condition or location. The enemy operatives know that someone stayed with him last night. They may try to identify and target that person. Sarah felt a chill of fear run through her. "You're saying they might come after me now?" "It's a possibility we have to consider," General Morrison replied. "These are people who don't distinguish between combatants and civilians. To them, anyone who helped Chen is an enemy." Chen struggled to sit up further. "General, with respect, Ms. Martinez is a medical professional doing her job. She can't be held responsible for operational outcomes. Unfortunately, Sergeant, the people trying to kill you don't make such distinctions," General Hayes said. "To them, she's now part of the equation." Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is insane. 24 hours ago I was worried about passing my medical boards. Now you're telling me that international assassins might want to kill me because I sat with an injured patient? We understand how overwhelming this must be," General Park said. "But we also need you to understand that your safety and Sergeant Chen's safety are now linked. The best way to protect both of you is to work together." "Work together how?" Sarah asked. General Hayes pulled out a folder and set it on the small table next to Chen's bed. "We're proposing to transfer Sergeant Chen to a secure medical facility where he can complete his recovery under protection. We'd like you to continue as his primary care provider during that time." Sarah stared at the folder. "You want me to go into hiding with him?" "We want you to continue providing medical care while trained security professionals ensure your safety," General Morrison clarified. "Think of it as a temporary assignment to a specialized unit." Chen was shaking his head. "Generals, I appreciate the concern, but I can't ask Ms. Martinez to uproot her life because of my situation." "You're not asking," General Hayes said firmly. "We're asking. And we're asking because the intelligence we've gathered suggests that the threat to both of you will persist until the larger operation is complete." Sarah sat back down, her mind racing. "What kind of larger operation?" "The kind that will neutralize the threat that's been targeting American interests," General Park replied. "The kind that Sergeant Chen's original mission was just the beginning of." The implications were staggering. Sarah realized she was being offered a chance to step into a world she had never imagined, a world where medical care and national security intersected in ways that medical school had never prepared her for. "If I say no?" Sarah asked quietly. General Hayes was honest. "Then, we'll arrange for your protection through other means. You'll be assigned security personnel, your movements will be restricted, and your life will be significantly disrupted for an indefinite period." "And if I say yes?" "Then, you'll be doing exactly what you've been doing, providing medical care to someone who needs it. The only difference is that you'll be doing it in a secure environment where both of you can be properly protected." Chen was watching Sarah's face intently. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that what you did last night, it means more than you can possibly understand. You didn't just keep me alive. You did it with kindness and professionalism when you had every reason to be afraid." Sarah looked at him, seeing not just the injured soldier but the man who had trusted her with his vulnerability during the darkest hours of the night. She thought about their conversations, about his dedication to protecting people who would never know his name, about the weight of responsibility he carried. "Dr. Richardson will support whatever decision you make," General Morrison said. "Your medical training won't be interrupted. In fact, you'll be exposed to specialized trauma medicine that few civilian doctors ever have the opportunity to learn." "How long would this arrangement last?" Sarah asked. General Hayes consulted her own tablet. Current intelligence suggests 2 to 3 weeks for the completion of the larger operation. During that time, both you and Sergeant Chen would be in a secure facility with full medical support and protection. Sarah stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at Fort Bragg in the early morning light. Soldiers were going about their daily routines, most of them unaware that international assassins had been intercepted in their hospital just hours before. She thought about her reasons for choosing military medicine, about her desire to serve something larger than herself, about the moment she had decided to stay with Chen through the night. Every instinct told her that this was exactly the kind of situation she had unconsciously prepared for her entire career. Sergeant Chen, she said, turning back to face him. If our situations were reversed, what would you do? Chen met her gaze steadily. I'd do whatever was necessary to protect someone who had protected me. Sarah nodded slowly. Then I guess I have my answer. General Hayes smiled for the first time since entering the room. Does that mean you'll accept the assignment? It means I'll continue doing my job, Sarah said firmly. Taking care of my patient and making sure he recovers completely. Everything else is just details. General Morrison began gathering the papers from the folder. There will be paperwork, briefings, and security protocols to review. We'll need to move both of you within the next few hours. Where will we be going? Sarah asked. General Park was already making notes on his tablet. A secure medical facility designed specifically for situations like this. You'll have everything you need to provide excellent care, and Sergeant Chen will have the protection he needs to recover without fear. Chen looked at Sarah with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with concern. Are you sure about this? Once we leave here, there's no going back to your normal life until this is over. Sarah checked his monitors one more time, adjusting his fore and making notes on his chart with the same professional competence she had shown all night. Sergeant, my normal life is taking care of patients who need help. As far as I can see, that's exactly what I'll be doing. As the generals began making preparations for their departure, Sarah realized that her career in military medicine was taking a turn she could never have anticipated. She had thought she was simply choosing a specialization that would allow her to serve her country while practicing medicine. Now she understood that sometimes serving meant stepping into roles you never expected, facing dangers you never imagined, and making choices that would change not just your career but your entire understanding of what duty meant. The sun was fully up now, casting normal morning light into a room where nothing would ever be normal again. Sarah looked at Chen, who was watching her with amazement and respect, and realized that some choices define you in ways you can only understand in retrospect. Her choice to stay with him through the night had seemed simple at the time. Now she understood that simple choices sometimes lead to extraordinary consequences, and that the most important decisions are often made without knowing their full significance until much later. As she prepared to follow Sergeant Chen into a world of classified operations and hidden threats, Sarah Martinez knew only that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, regardless of the dangers that might come. The secure medical facility was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Hidden within what appeared to be a corporate office complex in Virginia, it contained state-of-the-art medical equipment that rivaled any major hospital, combined with security measures that belonged in a military installation. Armed guards were stationed at multiple checkpoints, electronic surveillance monitored every corridor, and even the medical staff underwent daily security screenings. Sarah had spent the previous 48 hours in intensive briefings, learning protocols she never knew existed and signing documents that made her role in Chen's care official rather than circumstantial. The transition from Fort Bragg had been swift and efficient, accomplished in the early morning hours when most of the world was still asleep. Chen's new room was spacious and comfortable, designed to feel more like a high-end hotel suite than a hospital room. The medical equipment was seamlessly integrated into the decor, and large windows provided natural light, while sophisticated bulletproof glass ensured security. Despite the luxurious appearance, Sarah could see the subtle signs of a facility designed for protection rather than comfort. "This place is incredible," Sarah said, checking Chen's vital signs on equipment more advanced than anything she had used during her training. How many facilities like this exist? Chen was sitting up in bed, looking significantly better than he had at Fort Bragg. The swelling in his face had reduced, and his color was returning to normal. More importantly, his alert demeanor suggested that his cognitive functions had fully recovered from the concussion. More than you might expect, fewer than you might hope, Chen replied. There are people in this world who need medical care under circumstances that normal hospitals can't accommodate. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, the facility's medical director, entered the room carrying a tablet and wearing the confident expression of someone accustomed to dealing with unusual situations. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone who had seen everything the intersection of medicine and national security could produce. Good morning, both of you. Sergeant Chin, your latest test results are excellent. The internal bleeding has completely stopped, and your concussion symptoms are resolving ahead of schedule. She turned to Sarah. Dr. Martinez, your patient care notes are remarkably thorough. You've adapted to our systems very quickly. Sarah looked surprised. Dr. Martinez? Dr. Reyes smiled. Your medical degree was accelerated and officially conferred yesterday morning. Congratulations. Your performance during the crisis situation qualified you for emergency certification under a provision most medical schools don't advertise. Chin grinned despite his injuries. Looks like staying up all night with me was worth a medical degree. It's more than that. Dr. Reyes continued, setting her tablet on the bedside table. Dr. Martinez, your combination of medical skill and operational adaptability has attracted attention at very high levels. There's a proposal on the table that I think you should consider. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Every time someone in this new world said she should consider something, it turned out to be life-changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. What kind of proposal? Dr. Reyes pulled up a chair, her expression serious but encouraging. The Military Medical Corps has a special unit that provides care in classified operational environments. Think of it as emergency medicine meets special operations. They're offering you a position. Chen was studying Sarah's face. That's a huge opportunity. Those positions usually require years of specialized training and security clearance that takes forever to obtain. Your clearance has already been expedited based on your performance during this situation, Dr. Reyes explained. And your medical skills have been tested under circumstances that most doctors never face. You've proven you can function effectively when lives are on the line and information is limited. Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the Virginia countryside that concealed this remarkable facility. What would that position involve? Providing medical support for operations that can't use conventional medical facilities. Sometimes that means treating injuries in remote locations. Sometimes it means caring for patients whose identities or conditions must remain classified. Always it means being ready to adapt to situations that medical school doesn't prepare you for. Like spending the night protecting a ranger from international assassins? Sarah asked. Dr. Reyes nodded. Exactly like that. Most military doctors work in established hospitals or field units. This position would put you at the intersection of medicine and intelligence operations. Chen was watching Sarah with an expression of admiration mixed with concern. Sarah, you should know what you'd be getting into. The people I work with, we deal with threats that most people can't imagine. The medical support we need isn't always in safe, controlled environments. Sarah turned back from the window. What do you mean? Chen chose his words carefully. Sometimes medical care has to be provided in the middle of ongoing operations. Sometimes the patient can't be moved to a hospital. Sometimes the hospital itself might be compromised or under threat. Dr. Reyes nodded approvingly at Chen's explanation. Sergeant Chen is being diplomatic. What he's describing is medicine practiced under combat conditions, often with incomplete information and limited resources. It requires doctors who can make decisions quickly and function effectively under extreme stress. Sarah considered what she was being offered. 3 days ago, she had been a medical intern focused on learning routine procedures and building her clinical experience. Now she was being invited to join a world where medical care intersected with operations most people would never know about. "Can I ask what happened to the people who tried to kill Sergeant Chen?" Dr. Reyes and Chen exchanged a look. "That information is classified, but I can tell you that the immediate threat has been neutralized," Dr. Reyes replied. Chen was more direct. "They won't be trying again. Ever." The finality in his tone made Sarah understand that she was dealing with people who operated by rules very different from the civilian world. Lives hung in the balance, and mistakes had permanent consequences. "If I take this position, would I work with people like Sergeant Chen regularly?" "Among others," Dr. Reyes said. "Rangers, special forces, intelligence operatives, and people whose job descriptions are classified. You'd be providing medical care to individuals whose work protects national security." Sarah spent the next hour reviewing documents that outlined the position, the training requirements, and the implications for her career. The offer was comprehensive: advanced medical training, specialized certifications, and assignment to cases that would challenge every skill she possessed. Chen had been quiet during her review, but finally spoke up. "Sarah, can I tell you something honestly?" She looked up from the documents. "Of course. The work these people do, it changes you. Once you've seen what threats actually exist in the world, it's hard to go back to thinking about medicine as just treating routine illnesses and injuries. You start to understand that sometimes healing people means protecting them from dangers they don't even know exist." Dr. Reyes nodded. "That's an astute observation, Sergeant Chen. Dr. Martinez, this position would mean accepting responsibility for protecting people who protect others. It's not a decision to make lightly." Sarah walked back to Chen's bedside and checked his monitors, a habit she had developed over the past few days. His recovery was progressing excellently, and she found satisfaction in knowing that her care had contributed to that progress. "Sergeant Chen, can I ask you something?" "Anything. When you decided to become a ranger, did you know what you were really signing up for?" Chen considered the question seriously. "I thought I did. I was wrong. The reality was both harder and more important than I expected." "Do you regret it?" "Never. Even lying here with a dozen broken bones, knowing that people want me dead because of work they'll never get credit for, I've never regretted it." Sarah looked at Dr. Reyes. "How long do I have to decide?" "The position needs to be filled quickly. 24 hours. That evening, Sarah found herself alone with Chen while Dr. Reyes attended to other patients in the facility. The conversation had moved away from medical care and career decisions to more personal topics: their backgrounds, their families, their hopes for the future. "You know," Chen said thoughtfully, "when I woke up in that hospital room at Fort Bragg, the last thing I expected was to meet someone who would change my understanding of what courage looks like." Sarah looked surprised. "I wasn't being brave. I was doing my job. That's exactly what made it brave. You stayed because it was the right thing to do, not because you knew it was dangerous or important. That's the purest kind of courage there is." "I've been thinking about something you said," Sarah replied. "About the cost of protecting people. I think I'm beginning to understand what you meant." Chen nodded. "The cost isn't just what happens to you. It's what you have to be willing to give up to do the work. Normal life, predictable routines, the luxury of not knowing how dangerous the world really is. But also," Sarah said slowly, "the cost of not doing the work. Knowing that people are in danger and choosing not to help when you have the ability to make a difference." Over the next several hours, they talked about the nature of service, the weight of responsibility, and the satisfaction that comes from using your skills to protect others. Sarah began to understand that her choice wasn't really between a normal medical career and an unusual one. It was between using her abilities in routine ways and using them to make a difference in situations where that difference might mean the difference between life and death. "There's something else you should know," Chen said as the evening grew later. "The people offering you this position, they're not just looking for medical skills. They're looking for someone who can be trusted with secrets that could endanger lives if they were revealed. They're looking for someone who won't break under pressure. They're looking for someone who will stay with a patient through 6 hours of uncertainty because that's what the situation requires. Sarah smiled. Are you saying they're recruiting me because I'm stubborn? I'm saying they're recruiting you because when everything went wrong and you had no idea what was really happening, you made the right choices for the right reasons. That's not something you can teach. The next morning, Dr. Reyes returned with additional information about the position and the training Sarah would receive. The program was comprehensive, covering everything from tactical medicine to security protocols, from treating combat injuries to providing care in hostile environments. One last question, Sarah said after reviewing the materials. If I take this position, will I be able to continue caring for Sergeant Chen until he's fully recovered? Dr. Reyes smiled. Actually, that would be your first assignment. Sergeant Chen's recovery is expected to take another 2 weeks, and his security situation requires continued specialized care. You'd be his primary physician during that time while beginning your training. Chen grinned. Looks like you're stuck with me a little longer. Sarah made her decision with the same certainty she had felt when choosing to stay with Chen through that first crucial night. When do I start? Dr. Reyes extended her hand. Welcome to a world you never knew existed, Dr. Martinez. I think you're going to find it suits you perfectly. As Sarah shook hands with Dr. Reyes, she realized that her simple decision to sit with an injured patient had led her to discover a calling she had never imagined. She was about to begin a career that would challenge every skill she possessed and require her to operate in circumstances that would test her courage, her competence, and her commitment to healing others. Chen was watching her with an expression of deep respect and something that might have been pride. Sarah, I have a feeling this is just the beginning of what you're capable of. Looking back, Sarah would remember this moment as the point when her real medical career began, not with the diploma she had earned, but with the choice to step into a world where medical care and courage intersected in ways that would define the rest of her professional life. The secure facility hummed quietly around them, protecting people who protected others, healing those who put themselves in harm's way to keep the world safe. And Sarah Martinez, who had become Dr. Martinez almost by accident, knew that she had found exactly where she belonged. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in a briefing room that looked like something from a spy movie, surrounded by people whose faces she would never forget but whose names she could never reveal. The walls were lined with monitors displaying information in multiple languages, and the assembled group represented the kind of international cooperation that most civilians never knew existed. Chen sat beside her, fully recovered and back in uniform, looking every inch the elite soldier he was. His injuries had healed completely, and the past 2 weeks had transformed their relationship from doctor-patient to something resembling partnership. Sarah had come to understand that in this world, trust was the most valuable currency, and she had earned it through her actions rather than her credentials. General Hayes stood at the front of the room, her bearing as commanding as it had been in that hospital room at Fort Bragg. Behind her, a large screen displayed a map marked with locations across 3 continents, connected by lines that suggested a network of operations Sarah was only beginning to comprehend. Ladies and gentlemen, General Hayes began. Operation Nightingale has been completed successfully. The terrorist network that targeted Sergeant Chen and threatened American interests has been dismantled. More importantly, the intelligence gathered during this operation has prevented attacks that would have killed thousands of innocent civilians. Applause filled the room, and Sarah noticed that several people were looking at her with expressions of respect and gratitude. She still felt out of place among these professionals who operated in shadows and spoke in code, but she was beginning to understand her role in their world. Chen leaned over to whisper in her ear. That's the first time I've seen some of these people smile. You have no idea how many lives you helped save. General Hayes continued her briefing, explaining how the assassination attempt on Chen had provided crucial intelligence about the terrorist network's capabilities and plans. The security measures put in place to protect him had allowed intelligence operatives to trace communication networks, identify key players, and ultimately neutralize the entire organization. Dr. Martinez, General Hayes said, turning her attention to Sarah, Your decision to maintain continuous care for Sergeant Chen provided the stable environment our intelligence teams needed to conduct their investigation. Your medical documentation also provided valuable information about the nature of the attack and the sophistication of our enemies. Sarah felt a flush of pride mixed with disbelief. I was just keeping detailed patient records. Those records helped us understand the precision of the assassination attempt and the level of planning involved, explained a man Sarah knew only as Director Smith. The analysis of Sergeant Chen's injuries provided crucial intelligence about the weapons and techniques being used against our operatives. Dr. Reyes stepped forward from her position along the wall. More importantly, Dr. Martinez has demonstrated the kind of adaptability and judgment we need in physicians who support classified operations. She's completed her preliminary training and is ready for field assignment. Chen looked at Sarah with surprise. Field assignment? Already? Sarah had spent the past 2 weeks immersed in the most intensive training of her life. Beyond advanced trauma medicine, she had learned to provide medical care in hostile environments, to treat injuries without conventional medical support, and to maintain operational security while saving lives. The training had been exhausting but exhilarating, pushing her to develop skills she had never imagined needing. General Hayes nodded approvingly. Dr. Martinez will be assigned to support a joint operation in Southeast Asia. A team of special operations personnel needs medical support in a location where conventional medical facilities are unavailable. Sarah felt the familiar flutter of nervous excitement she had learned to associate with new challenges in this world. What kind of operation? Director Smith consulted his tablet. Humanitarian relief in a region where natural disaster has created both a medical emergency and a security threat. Relief supplies are being diverted by hostile forces, and medical personnel need protection while treating civilian casualties. The mission requires a physician who can provide emergency medical care while embedded with a security team, General Hayes explained. Someone who can adapt to changing circumstances and function effectively when the situation doesn't match the plan. Chen was studying Sarah's face. That's exactly the kind of mission where your training will be tested. Are you ready for it? Sarah considered the question honestly. 3 weeks ago, her biggest concern had been passing her medical board examinations. Now she was being asked to provide medical care in a foreign country where hostile forces might interfere with humanitarian relief efforts. I think the real question is whether I'm ready not to do it, Sarah replied. I've learned too much about what's at stake to go back to pretending that medicine exists in isolation from the threats people face. Dr. Reyes smiled with satisfaction. That's exactly the answer we hoped to hear. The briefing continued with detailed information about the mission, the team Sarah would be joining, and the medical challenges she could expect to encounter. The natural disaster had created massive casualties among the civilian population, but the region's political instability meant that international relief efforts were being complicated by armed groups seeking to profit from the chaos. Your team leader will be Captain Maria Santos, General Hayes explained, indicating a woman in military fatigues whose bearing suggested extensive special operations experience. She's led humanitarian missions in 12 different countries and has never lost a team member. Captain Santos stepped forward, extending her hand to Sarah. Dr. Martinez, I've read your file. What you did for Sergeant Chen demonstrates exactly the kind of judgment we need in the field. Sarah shook the captain's hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. I'm honored to be working with your team. The honor is mutual, Captain Santos replied. We've all read the reports about how you handled the situation at Fort Bragg. Staying calm under pressure while maintaining focus on patient care is exactly what we need when we're treating civilians in hostile environments. Chen stood up, his movements smooth and confident, showing no signs of his recent injuries. Sarah, I want you to know that what you're about to do, it's the most important work in the world. You'll be using your medical skills to help people who have no other options, in places where there's no backup plan. Sarah looked around the room at the assembled professionals, understanding that she was being welcomed into a community she had never known existed. These were people who worked in shadows to protect those who lived in light, who accepted risks that most people never imagined, and who found meaning in service that required anonymity. "There's one more thing," General Hayes said, consulting her notes. "Dr. Martinez, your performance over the past 3 weeks has been exceptional. The Medical Corps is offering you a permanent position with classified operations support. This would mean a commitment to this type of work for a minimum of 3 years. Sarah felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Accepting would mean leaving behind any possibility of a normal medical career, of treating routine ailments in comfortable hospitals, of having a predictable life that didn't involve international intrigue and life-threatening situations. What would happen if I decided I wanted to return to conventional medicine after completing the Southeast Asia mission? Dr. Reyes answered honestly. You would always be welcome in civilian medicine. Your skills and experience would make you exceptionally qualified for trauma medicine or emergency care. But you would also know about threats and challenges that most doctors never encounter. It would be difficult to find the same sense of purpose in routine medical practice. Chen nodded. It's like learning that there are monsters in the world. Once you know they exist, you can't pretend they don't. And once you know you can fight them, it's hard to choose not to. Sarah spent the next hour asking detailed questions about the position, the mission she would support, and the life she would be choosing. The answers painted a picture of a career that would challenge every skill she possessed, expose her to dangers she was only beginning to understand, and provide opportunities to make a difference in situations where that difference might mean the survival of innocent people. As the briefing concluded and people began filing out of the room, Chin approached Sarah with a serious expression. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. The night you stayed with me at Fort Bragg, when everything was uncertain and you had no idea what was really happening, that was the moment I knew you had what it takes to do this work. What do you mean? You could have left. You could have called for someone else to take over. You could have chosen not to get involved. But instead you stayed because your patient needed care, regardless of what else might be happening. That's the core of what this work requires, the willingness to do what's right even when you don't have complete information. Sarah smiled. Are you saying that stubbornness is a job qualification? Chen laughed. I'm saying that moral courage is a job qualification. And you have more of it than anyone I've ever met. Captain Santos approached them, carrying a folder that Sarah recognized as containing mission briefing materials. Dr. Martinez, if you're ready, we'd like to begin your mission-specific briefing. We deploy in 48 hours. Sarah looked at the folder, then at Chen, then at the room full of people who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. She thought about the conversation she had had with Chen during that long night at Fort Bragg, about the cost of protecting people and the cost of choosing not to protect them when you had the ability to help. Captain Santos, I'm ready. As she accepted the folder, Sarah realized that her journey from medical intern to operational physician had been completed not through gradual progression but through a series of moments when she had chosen to act according to her principles rather than her fears. Each choice had led to greater challenges and greater opportunities to make a difference. Chen extended his hand, and when Sarah shook it, she realized they were no longer doctor and patient but colleagues united by their commitment to using their skills in service of something larger than themselves. Take care of yourself out there, Doc, Chen said with a grin. And remember, sometimes the most important medical care happens in the middle of chaos. You've already proven you can handle it. As Sarah left the briefing room, mission folder in hand and her mind already turning to the challenges ahead, she understood that her decision to stay with an injured ranger through one difficult night had revealed a calling she had never known she possessed. She was no longer just Dr. Sarah Martinez, physician. She was Dr. Sarah Martinez, someone who brought healing to places where healing was desperately needed and desperately difficult to provide. She was someone who had chosen to step into a world where medical care intersected with courage, where saving lives meant accepting risks, and where the most important work was often the work that no one would ever know about. Looking back at the secure facility that had become her temporary home, Sarah knew she was ready for whatever came next. She had learned that sometimes the most significant choices in life come disguised as routine decisions, and that the willingness to stay when others leave To help when others hesitate, and to act when others are paralyzed by uncertainty, was the foundation of every meaningful contribution to the world. The Southeast Asia mission would test every skill she had learned and every principle she held dear. But Sarah Martinez had already passed the most important test of all. She had chosen to care for someone who needed help, regardless of the consequences to herself. Everything else was just applying that same principle in new and challenging circumstances. As she walked toward her next briefing, Sarah smiled, knowing that somewhere in the world there were people who would soon receive medical care in impossible circumstances because she had decided that being a doctor meant more than just treating patients in comfortable hospitals. It meant bringing healing wherever healing was needed, regardless of the dangers involved or the recognition received. Her transformation from intern to operational physician was complete, and her real career was just beginning.